Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are just gathering. As soon as I see that we have enough folks to get started, I will let you know, Dr. McGee.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. I think we're missing one still.
Still missing a couple more. Dr. Lynch is signed on yet too, so it looks like we're with him as well.
I'm here, Doug, so if Ray needs to take another meeting, it'll be all right.
He just joined us. I think
Okay, good.
we are ready to get started, Dr. McGee.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Just changing over. Okay, are we showing slides yet or no? Just want to make sure I can see the right screen.
Yep, the slides are up. If we could advance to the second one.
Perfect. Okay, I got it. All right. So first item, welcome everyone to the March Executive Committee meeting of the OPTN. With this, I call the meeting to order. We've established a quorum. Doug, we're not doing any.
I believe we need a vote for the quorum. So if Jaden can put the quorum link is now in the chat. If everyone can, all the board executive committee members can click on that link and confirm quorum. And once I receive confirmation, I will communicate that to you, Dr. McGee.
Great, thank you.
Dr. McGee, quorum has been reached.
Great, thank you. So again, general housekeeping rules. We ask everyone to keep your microphone muted if you're not speaking. It is being recorded. It is also an open session. You can enable or disable the closed captioning as you prefer. Keep your video on, please, and use the raise hand function to be recognized, and try to minimize the use of the chat for only technical issues so we can focus on the conduct of the meeting. Next slide. So this is our agenda. We're first going to approve the minutes or summary from the February 13th Executive Committee, and that is a voting item. I'm going to give some brief items, updates on some items currently in process. We will then move to some updates from our HRSA colleagues. We'll then have opportunity for other new business, and then we'll move into closed session. All right, next slide. So the first item here is approval of the summary from the February 13th meeting of the Executive Committee. Next slide. There's a motion to approve this with the authority granted to the Secretary to make non-substantive corrections as needed. Can I have a motion to support this?
Moved.
Thank you. Second. All right.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
The link
Actually, we have to.
Yeah, the link has been dropped into the chat. If I could ask everyone to vote, click on the link and vote. And once I hear confirmation, I will let you know. The motion passed. 8 approves, 0 rejections, 0 abstentions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So next item, please. So some brief updates of things that have been talked about at the governing board, but just providing some updates. The Normathermic Regional Perfusion Work Group is finalizing internal sign-off from the work group members. Again, this work group was charged with coming up with a response and defining some policy elements that would need to be put into a subsequent policy relating to NRP. That charge, or the developed charge with the directionality set by the work group, will be submitted to HRSA for subsequent policy development. And then once approved by HRSA, it will undergo the normal policy development route, including an opportunity for public comment and ultimately approval by the board before it's enacted as final policy. I anticipate the NRP work group making a presentation to the board regarding current status in the near future, perhaps not this meeting, but the next one, just based on some timing. Item number 2 has to do with discontinuation of COVID era practice about how somebody could be put temporarily on hold. As some people or as everyone on the call will remember, apparently it's been 6 years since the start of the COVID pandemic. That anniversary just passed recently. One of the emergency provisions that was made to allow centers to effectively put people on hold temporarily without formally inactivating them was you could set patients the donor criteria from age 98 to 99, which in effect basically made people not eligible for transplant. That was an emergency action which was intended to be which was brought to bear during the COVID pandemic. The COVID pandemic is over, and the board will be rescinding that practice. So just an update there. The people have also heard of the board has previously been notified about the work around investigating non-U.S. citizen, non-U.S. resident transplants in the United States based on some media articles. Right after that was published or brought to attention, the MPSC started evaluating practices and requesting information from particular centers. In addition, HRSA was asked to provide us with some data regarding both the practice as well as the use of exceptions and any evidence of allocation out of sequence. And that work is continuing once we're through the bridge period and the new contractors are established. We'll stand up a group to look at whether or not any revisions to these policies are warranted or updated. Centers will be reminded, though, that we need to continue to adhere to the current practices in place within OPTN policy. Finally, the secretary previously sent a requirement or a directive to establish the role of a patient safety officer within organ procurement organizations, and that work group is being formed under the direction of Dr. Debroy, and finalizing invitations of who will be on that. Again, that will go through the usual policy process of both public comment and board approval. Any questions about those 4 updates?
How is that work group? What are your goals for the composition, or is that not known yet?
It's basically OPO. So Dr. Debroy is going to chair it. There will be QI experts from both transplant and hospitals and OPOs. There'll be several there'll be OPO representation. There will be donor family representation, and there may be some representation from relevant medical specialties outside the typical OPTN component. I'm anticipating 6 to 8 people. And again, the directive is fairly focused, so we're shooting for a fairly appropriately quick timeline to just address the issues that were outlined in that letter.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And we'll also be looking to contact a lot of this is not entirely a new thing to lots of organizations. So I think we'll also make sure we know some best practices and other issues like that. So I think it's important to make sure the structure is there, but thanks.
That's what I was going for, is hopefully because there's a lot of places that already have this position.
Yeah, exactly. So it may involve there are probably some places that have it titled that way. There may be need to change it. There's a bunch of making sure there's a call, a organization chart that reflects the interactions. But I think this is just formalizing it across the OPTN, the practice that's present at many places right now. So, all right. Thanks, Sam. Any other questions?
George has a question.
Sorry, George, I don't see your hand. Let me see. Go ahead.
Thanks, John. I'm wondering, will the executive committee or the whole board get to take a look at the normothermic regional perfusion proposals before they go on to HRSA?
Yes. Or yeah, we're working on a way to put them on the OPTN 360 secure site to just see them. So
Right. Thank you.
yeah. And the review from HRSA is also just making sure their response that one is, and we want to make sure we're not violating any component of federal law, and we're acting under the right authority. So there's language regarding that, as well as making sure we're responsive to the request. So it is all pre-decisional. It is all pre-policy development, but the product, it's interim reports, probably the best way to look at it. But thanks. Other questions? Okay, well, with that, we're going to move into the next topic, which is an update from HRSA. One of the uh, as we've gone through this bridge period, there's been an opportunity to look and consider at various aspects of everything we do, which is both is a very good thing to do in general and a critical part of the modernization. One thing that is been the focus is many areas that have been a focus, but the integration of public comment and making sure that it gets integrated and presented to the committees for review, adjudication, and response is obviously something that's been very important. And I think there have been some advances in even how that process has worked over time. So Brianna is going to give an update about that. Brianna.
Thanks, John. You can go to the next slide. So just to tee things up quickly, the OPO committee will be meeting next week. That meeting instance has just been activated. But in the interim period, the OPO committee leadership has continued to meet to discuss the public comments around the donation after circulatory death proposed policy that went out. So you can go to the next slide. So here we have public comments by commenter type, and to Dr. McGee's earlier point, one thing the federal government does very well is a public comment period. This is a really important component part of the federal government's notice and comment rulemaking. And so we were happy to work with the leads of these committees for both of these policy proposals to introduce some of the rigor and qualitative and quantitative analysis that the federal government routinely uses with notice and public comment periods to evaluate those comments. So here you see for the DCD proposal, the public comments by commenter type, and they were coded by individuals, organizations, or anonymous and unspecified. So I think a very interesting difference in the DCD public comment proposal our proposal for public comment period was that this is somewhat unusual in some ways for the OPTN to see this many individuals commenting. So that's really great engagement. All voices are important, but I do think it is notable that the individual comments were high. Keep going. Great. And then by organizational type, the breakdown is shown here on your screen for OPO, advocacy group, and transplant center. And again, the OPO committee is going to review a much more in-depth deck that has been developed with the HRSA surge support folks on my team and with the OPO committee leadership. So please know the OPO committee is going to be walking through these as well as the DCD work group. But you can go to the next slide. There were 91 unique comments analyzed, 7 themes that were identified within all the complete set of comments, and comments were able to be associated with more than one theme. There were 2 comments that were excluded from the quantitative categorization and the thematic coding because they were exact duplicates, and that's common in the federal government context. If something is a complete copy and paste, in order to make sure we're not double counting things in that way, we exclude complete duplicates and count only the first comment of that type. And our analysis emphasized substantive concerns and proposed policy changes. There had previously been more of an emphasis on sentiment, and we're moving into a more common framework again used in the notice and public comment that the federal government engages in. So keep going. So we identified together, again, this was HRSA surge support and the OPO committee leads and just taking multiple attempts at forming thematic analyses. We tested out several different categories and themes, and after several, reviews, providing feedback, going back and looking, checking in every way that we could, we settled on these 7 themes that you see here. I'm not going to go into describing each of these themes. In that, we want the OPO committee and DCD work group to take the very deep dive on further adjudication, but you can see here that the most common theme represented in the complete set of comments was a reporting and transparency theme, and then you saw NRP came up frequently, as well as some other questions, concerns, or requests for clarification around standardization and the DCD pause. You can go to the next slide. The rabies transmission prevention, that public comment period, also we undertook a similar tactic of doing a much less sentiment focused and much more thematically focused review of all of the comments that were received. The DTAC leadership has gone through all of these themes as well, but I can show these to you really quickly so you all are just apprised. Again, the adjudication will lie with the work group and committees that were working on these policy proposals originally, just like always. You can go to the next slide. So by type, you'll see fewer individuals, more organizations, and a few anonymous. Keep going. There were 27 unique public comments analyzed. 8 issue themes were applied. Again, after we took several slices, we debated, we reviewed, we double-checked, we recoded, and comments could be associated with more than one theme. Again, moving from sentiment into substantive concerns and implementation. And we did have any outlier positions that were not excluded from the data set, but instead actually we took a second pass if there was something that was very different from the rest of the comments to make sure we understood and could contextualize what that comment might be about. So you can keep going. The fraction of comments by issue theme, you'll see here, there were concerns about the use of this increased focus or attention to rabies risk as leading to organ non-use. There were questions about operationalizing the CDC consultation, some screening definition questions, and how potential candidates or waitlist candidates who had that organ offer with identified potential rabies risk might be informed. So I think overall, again, this is going really well. We're excited to show kind of a slightly different paradigm for how we can address those issues that is again focused on substantive changes to the policy language, or changes to implementation that need to happen based on the commenters' feedback. You can go to the next slide. So next steps, the committee, and it should be committee and or work group. I apologize, that's my oversight. But for those folks who have been in the OPTN policymaking process for a long time, this is the same way it's been happening for a lot of years, except much faster, and using the public comment for what it really is intended to do, which is get a broad range of voices to all weigh in on what this proposed policy would mean and how it could be implemented and how it can be sharpened or improved if adopted. So we'll go back to the committees and work groups. Those meetings will be happening in the next few weeks. For each issue, the committee or work group will determine whether policy language changes are warranted. And if there's no change warranted, then they'll specify why they believe that is justifiable in the context of this policy. Then the same kind of revised draft policy language and a written justification, which will always be grounded in both patient safety considerations, ethical standards, and operational feasibility. Same kind of document will come back to, I believe it's the board, but Doug, please tell me if it's XCOM first and then the board. I apologize if I'm eliding steps, but I believe it returns to the board for a full vote after the committee and work group adjudication.
That is correct.
Thank you, Doug. And just for everyone to know, HRSA is standing right beside you all in this process. And our engagement has been robust to just make sure we are there with you. There's no surprises on either side. We will take a final HHS review of the final proposed policy language before the board vote to make sure there's no issues with statutory or regulatory requirements or if there's any showstoppers. But since we've been there every step of the way, I think this is a really great model for how we can continue a faster and also community involved policymaking potentially moving forward. So that's the end of my update for public comment.
Great, thanks, Brianna. This is the third or fourth time I've heard parts of this, including actually just in the early steps of the process. And it was one of the reasons to present it here is just to show that it's robust. And I was quite impressed with the steps in it. And I think it will be a good model moving forward to just thematically know those things, all the stuff that was here. Alan.
Yeah, thanks. A comment and a question. The comment is great work. Brianna, this is really a huge improvement from what we've seen in the past from the contractor. My question to you is this going to stay a HRSA activity, or do you foresee this moving over to the new policy contractor type person?
Thank you, Alan. I will say that I have been told that our team does actually need sleep. So we are excited to onboard the new contractor, and our plan is to stay very much lockstep with you all in the policymaking process. So again, no surprises, everyone working together all along the way. I would see the analysis work moving to the new contractor, but this shift in paradigm where HRSA is here, HRSA is participating in this way, and we're getting quicker and quicker feedback and moving more towards those actions the board wants to undertake. But I think that instead of our surge staff being the front lines for analysis, you'll see the contractor take that over, but we'll keep this paradigm if you all are happy with it. And I think the feedback so far from the OPO committee, DTAC, and others has been really, really positive.
Other questions? Thanks, Alan, for asking that question, because it just is a point of clarification. There's sometimes the statement will be made that HRSA is doing this, and there's clear roles of oversight, partnership, and then some of it is this surge support that Brianna is talking about. So some of these tasks that they're helping with in the transition period are purely administrative surge support help. Which is both appreciated, not forever, and doesn't have its thumb on the scale. So just clarifying that, just because some people are like, "Oh my God, HRSA is taking over the email news, whatever." So it's distinct, and it will become more apparent as the new contractors are stood up. The new contract, just to also mention it, the new contractors have not been named yet. As soon as they're named, those names will be disclosed to everybody, and we'll continue to work on how that looks going forward. There has been a great deal of movement from the previous contractor files information. It's all being stood up into OPTN 360 and integrated, and then all the new contractors will need to be both brought in. We'll need to learn how to work with them, so it's not going to be a one-day thing, but I think it again will, at the end result, deliberate structure, deliberate assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of the past, and continuing to move forward with a more nimble, responsive, and efficient system. So thanks, Brianna. Any other questions for our HRSA colleagues? Okay, next slide. So at this point, I'll ask for any other new business related to open session EC. All right, I don't see any hands. Next slide. So with that, we're going to, Doug, remind me again, do we formally adjourn this before we move into closed session, or are we just moving to closed session before?
We're going to move into, we are going to formally close the open session and thank all the public who were able to participate today. And we will ask them if they could leave now. And once we verify that all the public members who should not be moved over to closed session, that happens, I will formally let you know.
Thank you.